The lawyer was still talking when the door opened. Nobody looked up. Doors open in courtrooms. It happens. The gallery kept whispering. The clerk kept writing. Isioma Okonkwo sat at the defense table and thought about lunch. Then the room went quiet. Not all at once, row by row, the way a power cut moves through a building, one section, then the next, then everything. Isioma felt it before she understood it. She turned. A woman had walked in. Navy dress, flat shoes, briefcase in one hand, a teenage boy's hand in the other. She wasn't running. She wasn't crying. She wasn't doing anything that should have stopped a room cold. She was just walking, straight toward the front, steady, like someone who had been planning this exact walk for a very long time. The prosecutor forgot his sentence. The clerk stood up without knowing why. And Isioma, who had sat through 3 weeks of this trial without flinching, who had told her lawyer that very morning, relax, it's handled, felt something move through her chest that she had not felt in 15 years. Fear, real fear, the kind that starts in the stomach. The woman reached the clerk's desk, set the briefcase down, opened it, took out a single envelope and placed it on the desk without hurrying, without drama, like she had rehearsed it 10,000 times because she had. Then she looked up at the room. My name is Adaeze Remi Okonkwo, and I have been dead for 15 years. The room didn't react immediately. It took about 3 seconds, and then it exploded. But to understand what happened next and why that envelope was about to turn a 3-year sentence into 25, you have to go back to a house in Benin City. A little girl, a stepmother who smiled at the right people, and a plan so cold it was carried out on a rainy Tuesday night while a 13-year-old slept. This is the story of what happened when they thought she was gone, and what she was doing while they weren't looking. To understand what Isioma Okonkwo did, you have to understand what she was before she did it. In Benin City, the Okonkwo name carried real weight. Chief Emeka Okonkwo had built his construction business from nothing, one contract, one relationship, one carefully protected reputation at a time. By the time he married Isioma, he was already the kind of man people crossed the street to greet. And Isioma, who came from a family with a proud name and an empty account, understood precisely what she had married into. She also understood very quickly what had come with the marriage. Emeka already had a daughter. Remi was 4 years old when Isioma arrived, small and unhurried, with her late mother's face and her father's unmovable eyes. She didn't cry easily. She didn't reach for attention. She watched people the way a child watches when she has learnt that the world is worth studying before it is trusted. Isioma told herself she tried. For a while, perhaps she did, but trying, for Isioma, had a ceiling. That ceiling showed itself every time Emeka came home from a long trip and went to Remi first, before he set his bag down, before he loosened his tie, before he acknowledged anyone else in the room. Every time his eyes went somewhere private when he looked at his daughter, somewhere Isioma could not follow. Remi was not the obstacle. Remi was the reminder of the woman who came before, of an attachment Isioma could not reach or replace. And Isioma had no patience for things she could not control. When Remi was 7, Emeka's father, Pa Okonkwo, a retired magistrate with a sharp memory and even sharper instincts, came to stay for 3 months. He sat with Isioma at meals. He watched her at family gatherings. He said very little. Before he left, he took his son aside and spoke to him in a way Emeka never repeated to his wife. But that same week, Pa Okonkwo changed his will. Everything the land in Sapele, the trust fund, the accounts passed directly to Remi, locked until her 30th birthday. Managed by an independent trustee the old man had chosen specifically to place it beyond anyone else's reach, Isioma's name appeared nowhere. She received the news with a face like stone, thanked the lawyer, took her husband's hand, walked out into the afternoon sun, and she began to think. Pa Okonkwo died 2 years later. The will was read in a small office on Sapele Road. Remi, 9 years old, sitting in a chair too wide for her, received everything: the land, the trust fund, the accounts. All of it locked and entirely out of reach for anyone whose name was not Adaize Remi Okonkwo. Isioma sat across the room and listened without blinking. She didn't argue, she didn't weep. She thanked the lawyer, took her husband's hand, and walked outside like a woman who had just been handed information she intended to act on. It took her 4 years. 4 years of watching, waiting, finding the right people. Her brother, Festus, a man who had spent his adult life navigating around legitimate systems, became the architect. A corrupt probate official named Mr. Dada became the instrument. The plan they built was not complicated. It only required that enough people with official stamps were willing to lie, and that the lie came wrapped in enough grief to make questioning it feel wrong. A falsified death certificate, a staged fire, an empty casket with brass handles, buried with enough ceremony to silence any doubt. The night they chose was a rainy Tuesday in November. Remi was 13. She had gone to bed early after finishing her homework, uniform hanging on the door, textbooks stacked in the order she would need them. She was the kind of child who prepared carefully because she had learnt she could not rely on anyone else to do it for her. She woke to the smell of smoke. The house girl, a woman named Mama Titi, who had worked in that compound for 6 years and feared God considerably more than she feared Isioma, was already at her door. Voice low, shaking, certain. "Get up, right now. Do not make any noise. We have no time." Remi looked at her face. She understood immediately that this was not about the smoke. She left everything: her uniform, her books, her shoes. She ran. Mama Titi pushed her through the back gate and into the hands of her own brother, a fisherman named Godwin, already waiting in a battered Peugeot, engine running, headlights off. Remi didn't know where she was going. She only knew that Mama Titi was pressing something into her palm, a thin envelope with 3,000 naira and a piece of paper folded 4 times, and whispering the last thing she would ever say to her. "They planned this. Don't go back. Don't call your father. Don't trust anyone who knows your name." The car pulled into the rain. Remi pressed her face against the cold window and watched the compound disappear. 13 years old, no shoes, no bag, the clothes she had slept in. By the time they reached the expressway, she was shaking not from the cold, but from the specific violence of understanding, all at once, that the people meant to protect her had been the ones making the plan. 11 hours to Calabar, 3 police checkpoints, bad roads, long stretches of dark. Godwin did all the talking. Remi sat in the back, wrapped in an old wrapper, and held herself together with a stillness that would become, over the next 15 years, the most powerful thing about her. Godwin's sister, a quiet woman named Auntie Bose, took her in without a single question. Room, bed, food, no demands. She understood that some situations need presence before they need anything else. 3 months later, Remi discovered she was pregnant. A boy she had trusted briefly, one short, quiet season before her world collapsed, had left something behind that no forged document and no corrupt official could reach. She sat on the edge of Auntie Bose's bed with the result in her hands, stayed still for a long time. Then she made the decision that would define the next 15 years of her life. She was not going to collapse, she was not going to disappear, she was going to survive, and she was going to make sure her child survived with her. Back in Benin City, the morning was spectacular. Chief Emeka Okonkwo buried an empty casket in a mahogany box with brass handles. He wore black for 6 weeks. He received visitors in a sitting room thick with incense and condolence envelopes. He wept at the graveside in front of 200 people, and those who watched said they had never seen a man so completely undone by loss. Nobody questioned it. Why would they? The fire was real. The damage was real. The body, what little remained, they were told, was beyond identification. The death certificate was signed. Within 8 months, the trust fund had been released. The land in Sapele quietly transferred into Isioma's name, and every legal trace of Remi's existence reduced to a headstone on Airport Road. Festus bought a new car. Mr. Dada received a parcel of land in Ubo. Isioma remodeled the kitchen and began referring to herself at social functions as a woman who had suffered more than most and survived with grace. The community mourned Remi genuinely. She had been the kind of girl teachers remembered by name, and neighbors noticed without being able to say exactly why. People spoke of her at family gatherings, wrapped her memory in sighs and shaking heads, until the sighs grew shorter and the years kept moving, and she became what the dead always eventually become to people who didn't love them enough to keep asking questions. A memory. A cautionary story, a name on a stone. What no one in that city knew was that the girl they were mourning was at that exact moment sitting in a small room in Calabar, nursing a newborn son she had named Chukudera. God has answered, pressing her lips to his forehead and making him a promise she fully intended to keep. She chose that name not because her situation felt like an answer. Nothing about those early years felt like anything except survival. She chose it because she needed something in his name she could return to on the worst mornings. A reminder that the story wasn't over. She raised him the way Auntie Bose had taken her in. Quiet consistency, no performance. A refusal to break that eventually stopped feeling like effort and became simply who she was. But there were nights that almost broke her anyway. Chukudera was 3 years old when the worst one came. It was a Thursday. Remi had lost her cleaning job 2 weeks earlier when the office block changed management and let all the contract staff go. She had exactly 40 naira left. No transport fare, no food in the house beyond a cup of gari and a small tin of groundnuts she had been rationing for 4 days. Chukudera was hungry and too young to understand why his mother kept telling him to wait, just a little more. She sat on the kitchen floor that night after he finally fell asleep. She didn't cry loudly. She pressed her back against the wall and let the tears come silently, the way she did everything, without performance, without witnesses. She thought about stopping, not in a dark way, just in the way a person thinks when they have been carrying something heavy for so long that putting it down, even for one night, feels like the only mercy available. Then she looked at the bedroom door, at the small shape she could see through the gap, rising and falling in sleep. She got up, washed her face, sat back at the table, picked up her notebook. She kept going. By the time Chukudera was 4, she had a junior clerk position at a small law firm on Marian Road. She was punctual, precise. She asked the kind of questions that made senior partners stop and look at her twice. By the time he was 8, she was a full legal secretary. She learned everything: contracts, probate filings, title transfers, how documents move through the court system, and how they could be corrupted without leaving obvious marks. She wasn't studying abstractly. She was studying the exact mechanism used to erase her, learning it the way you learn a lock you intend to open from the other side. She never spoke about it at work. Not one word. Not to anyone. But at night, after Chukudera was asleep, she sat at the kitchen table and built her case the way a careful person builds anything meant to last, one piece at a time, nothing rushed. Every claim supported before the next one was added. She obtained Mr. Dada's original signature on her falsified death certificate through a legitimate records request. She got a certified copy of Pa Okonkwo's real will. She found the land transfer documents, the trust fund release papers. And then in the 7th year, she found something she had not expected. A handwritten receipt, carelessly filed in a property transaction database that connected Festus directly to the Sapele land acquisition 9 months after the fire. She put everything into a manila envelope. The envelope went into a metal box. The metal box went under her bed. She wasn't waiting for courage. She had that. She was waiting for the moment when everything she had gathered would land in the right room with the right consequences. Not enough to inconvenience Isioma, enough to finish her. That morning came on an ordinary Tuesday. She unfolded the newspaper over breakfast and read a headline that made her set down her tea and sit very still. Benin property developer Isioma Okonkwo arraigned for land fraud. She read it twice, folded the paper, finished her tea. Then she told Chukudera to get dressed. They were going to Benin City. They arrived the evening before the sentencing. Remi had one thing she needed to do before morning. One stop she had not planned for, but found herself making anyway, almost without deciding to, the way you find yourself standing somewhere you have avoided for years because your body knew before your mind did that it was finally time. She and Chukudera took an Okada to the cemetery on Airport Road just before dusk. She had not been here before. She had been erased before a headstone could mean anything to her. And she had spent 15 years in another city building something that did not include standing over her own grave. But now she was here. Now she was 33 years old with a briefcase and a son and a metal box full of truth, and she needed to see it. The headstone was small, grey. The inscription was simple. Adaeze Remi Okonkwo, beloved daughter, gone too soon. She stood in front of it and did not move for a long time. Chukudera stood beside her and read the stone and read it again. He was quiet in the way he went quiet when he was thinking something through Josette. I still, the particular silence of a boy who had his mother's habit of not speaking until he was sure of what he wanted to say. Then he said it. Mommy, if they said you died here, does that mean I was never supposed to exist? Remi did not answer immediately. She looked at his name on the stone, her name, the name she had been born into and had carried in secret for 15 years and was about to reclaim in a courtroom in the morning, and she felt something move through her that she could not have named if someone asked her to. Then she looked at her son. At this boy who should not have existed according to every forged document in that metal box. At this boy who was standing in the evening light beside the grave of the girl she used to be, asking the most serious question she had ever been asked. She put her hand on his face. You are the only part of this story, she said quietly, that they did not plan for, and you are the best thing in it. He didn't speak. His jaw tightened the way it did when something had gone deep. He nodded once. Then he looked back at the stone. They stood there together until the light started to go. Then Remi picked up her briefcase, straightened her dress, and walked out of that cemetery without looking back. She had seen enough. Tomorrow she was going to walk into a courtroom and give that name back to herself. The charges against Isioma Okonkwo were not small. Over 5 years, she had acquired 14 properties across Edo State through fraudulent documentation, forged signatures, and a network of notaries who stamped papers without reading them. 47 families had lost land. 11 had lost homes they had spent decades building. The fraud ran into hundreds of millions of naira. 3 days on the front pages, then the slow grind of the court system. Isioma hired the best legal team money could buy. Her lead counsel, Barrister Efosa Ojo, known throughout Edo State for making clients look misunderstood rather than guilty, built her entire defense on sympathy. In his opening address, he described Isioma as a woman shaped by grief, a stepmother who had lost her only child to a tragic fire, a wife left to manage a complex estate alone, making decisions under pressure that a woman of her background and her loss could not reasonably have been expected to make perfectly. Some people in the gallery nodded. People who remembered the Okonkwo family in better days. People who had seen Isioma weep at that graveside 20 years ago and believed every tear. The 47 families who had lost their homes sat with their arms folded and their jaws tight, watching an expensive lawyer rearrange what had been done to them into something that almost sounded reasonable. The prosecution had a solid case, but solid didn't feel like enough. 3 years, the rumor moved along the benches. Maybe 2, with good behavior. The families exchanged glances and said nothing. The sentencing date was set, the morning arrived, and through the side door of courtroom 4, at 10:14 inches the morning, walked someone no one in that building had any reason to expect. Remi had driven from the hotel at 9:45 a.m. She and Chukudera had checked in the night before. She laid out his clothes before she slept. Clean white shirt, dark trousers, shoes she had polished herself. Her navy dress went on the chair. She didn't sleep much, not from fear, but from the particular stillness of someone who has been moving toward a single morning for 15 years and is finally one night away from it. She ate breakfast slowly, went through the metal box one last time, every document in order, every exhibit labeled the way she had watched lawyers prepare evidence for 6 years from the other side of a desk. Before they left, she sat across from Chukudera at the small table by the window. He looked at her in the way he had looked at her since the cemetery the evening before, like he was seeing something in her face that he hadn't fully seen before. Like the headstone had answered a question he hadn't known he was carrying. She said nothing about it. He said nothing about it. Some things are understood between people who have been through the same storm. They walked into the courthouse at 10:12 a.m. Security guard checked her ID, looked at her face, stepped aside, metal detector, briefcase strap adjusted, Chukudera's hand in hers. She pushed open the door to courtroom 4. The prosecutor saw her first. Mid-sentence, his words stopped. He looked down, looked back up. Something in his posture changed, a quiet straightening, and he did not speak again. Remi walked to the clerk's desk, set the briefcase down, opened it, removed the manila envelope, 7 years assembled, kept in a metal box under her bed in Calabar, and placed it on the desk. No hurry. No drama. Please give this to the judge. My name is Adayeze Remi Okonkwo, and I have been dead for 15 years. At the defendant's table, Isioma turned. She had been watching since the door opened, watched the woman cross the room, watched the briefcase open, watched the envelope land on the desk. And now she was looking at Remi, who was looking directly back at her, not with rage, not with tears. With the settled calm of someone who has waited a very long time for this moment and finds it, at last, exactly as she imagined. Isioma's mouth opened. One word came out, barely a sound, more breath than voice. How? Not a question, not quite a statement, just the sound a person makes when the architecture of 20 years collapses in a single second and the mind cannot yet form anything more than that one syllable. Barrister Ojo put his hand on her arm. She didn't feel it. Honorable Justice Amaka Osagi was not a woman who rattled easily. 22 years on the bench. She had heard confessions that made galleries weep. Denial so brazen they bordered on performance. She had learned to hold her face still while everything around her moved. But when the clerk placed the envelope in front of her and she read the cover letter one page, signed by a woman this court had declared dead 15 years ago, Justice Osagi removed her glasses, set them on the desk, and looked up at the room without speaking. She called a recess. It lasted 45 minutes. When she returned, the room was different, heavier. Barrister Ojo sat with his hands folded, and the barely visible expression of a man who had prepared for one conversation and was now being handed a completely different one. Isioma stared at the table. She had stopped looking at Remi. She had stopped looking at anything. Mrs. Okonkwo, your counsel argued this morning that you are a woman shaped by grief. That this court should weigh your suffering in its sentencing, the loss of a child taken too soon, carried with you ever since. Justice Osagie paused. I would like you to look at the woman standing in this courtroom. Isioma didn't move immediately. Barrister Ojo placed his hand briefly on her arm. There was nothing in his preparation that covered this moment. They both knew it. Slowly, Isioma turned. Remi looked back at her, not angry, not triumphant. She looked the way a person looks at the end of a very long road, tired deep in the bones, completely clear in the eyes. The look of someone who has arrived exactly where she intended. Justice Osagi continued. The documents presented this morning include a falsified death certificate bearing the signature of a former court official, one Emmanuel Dada. A fraudulent probate release authorizing the transfer of a trust fund belonging to the living individual standing before us. Land transfer documents executed in the accused's name within 10 months of that fabricated death declaration. And a sworn affidavit from one, Mama Titi Ago, an eyewitness to the planning of the staged fire, who has carried the weight of this knowledge for 15 years. Barrister Ojo rose to object. Justice Osagi looked at him. He sat back down. The charges before this court will be amended. Counsel for the prosecution will file additional counts before the close of this week: conspiracy to commit murder, falsification of public records, fraud upon the probate court, and the unlawful seizure of a minor's inheritance. She reached for her gavel. This sentencing is adjourned. The accused is remanded in custody. The gavel came down. Isioma made a sound that wasn't a word. Her knees went. The court orderly caught her and held her upright as she was led out, not as a woman receiving a lenient sentence for paperwork errors, but as a woman finally walking toward the full weight of what she had set in motion on a rainy Tuesday night in November 20 years ago. Festus was arrested before noon. Mr. Dada was brought in by evening. Remi did not watch Isioma leave. She had already turned away. She looked at the clerk's desk instead, at the empty space where the envelope had been sitting 20 minutes ago. 7 years of her life had lived in that envelope. 7 years of kitchen table nights, of careful handwriting, of teaching herself the exact language of the system that had buried her so she could use it to dig herself back out. The desk was empty now. The work was done. She picked up her briefcase and walked out. Chukwudera was waiting at the top of the steps. He had slipped out just before her quietly, without being asked, because he was 14 years old and already understood certain things about his mother that most adults would never understand about anyone. She stood beside him. Neither of them spoke. Below them, Benin City moved at its own pace. Hawkers, traffic, afternoon heat. A city that had no idea what had just changed inside that building. A city that had once buried her name and kept moving. "Are you okay?" Chukwudera asked. She thought about it, really thought about it. "Ask me again in a year." He looked at her sideways. She looked straight ahead. Then she said something she had never said out loud before, not to him, not to anyone. It came out the way things come out when the pressure finally lifts without planning, without ceremony. "I used to talk to a photograph of your great-grandfather. On the bad nights, I would take it out and tell him what I had found that week, what I had added to the box. I told him I was coming. I told him to be patient." Chukwudera was very still. Did he ever answer? She almost smiled. "Every time I got back up," that was the answer. She reached over, squeezed his hand once, let go, and then they walked down the steps. She was wearing shoes, clean, simple, flat shoes she had bought herself with money she had earned. Shoes, nothing like the bare feet that had run through a back gate in the rain 20 years ago. A 13-year-old girl with no name left to her, no direction, nothing but the darkness ahead and the sound of an engine already running. That girl had survived. She had walked and studied and hidden and built and refused on a kitchen floor with 40 naira and a sleeping child behind a closed door to stop. And now she was here, walking down the steps of the Benin City Courthouse in the afternoon light, shoulders straight, briefcase in hand, her son beside her, tall enough now that she had to look up slightly when she turned to him. They reached the bottom of the steps and turned onto the street. The city swallowed them like it swallows everyone, ordinary, unremarkable. Two people among thousands. But here is what Remi carried out of that courthouse that nobody could see. She didn't do it for justice, not for the 47 families in that gallery, not for the headlines that would follow. She did it because there was a girl who ran barefoot into the rain with nothing, and that girl deserved someone to come back for her. There was no one else left to do it, so she did it herself. And if you are watching this right now, if there is something in your life that someone buried a truth, a name, a version of yourself that was taken before you were old enough to fight for it, listen carefully. The people who wrong you are counting on one thing. They are counting on you to get tired, to convince yourself that moving on is the same as healing. That silence is the same as peace. That letting go is always wisdom. Sometimes it is. But sometimes the right thing to do is exactly what Remi did. You learn the system, you build the case, you wait for the door. And when it opens, you walk through it calmly, with your son beside you, with everything you have been carrying, and you place it on the desk. Before you go, two things. First, if you watch this far, you already know this channel is different. We do not do shallow stories here. Every video on this channel is built to make you feel something real. If that is what you came for, subscribe right now. Turn on notifications. Do not miss the next one. Second, share this video. Not because the algorithm needs it, because someone in your life needs to hear this story today. Someone who has been waiting. Someone who has been building something in silence. Someone who needs to know that patience is not weakness. Send it to them. Drop a comment below and tell me, what was the moment that got you? Was it the grave? Was it Chukudera's question? Was it that single word Isioma whispered? I want to know. New story drops next week. Be here.